So good morning, here I am in Newport in South Wales and with Neil Hamilton, who's the UKIP candidate in the forthcoming Newport West by-election, which is taking place on Thursday the 4th of April. Good morning, Neil.
Morning.
Neil, it's really nice to be here in Newport and talk to you and see that you're actually looking at the policies of the different parties. You're the candidate with 5 key policies that other people don't have. Clearly one of those is Brexit, we'll talk about that shortly, but one which really interests me as an Englishman is your unique policy to abolish the Welsh Assembly. Now, what was great coming here this morning was that we didn't have to pay on the Severn Bridge. I understand that was originally a UKIP policy that was taken over by other parties. Neil, of course, is in the Welsh Assembly. Would you like to tell us a bit about your policy, or our policy, UKIP's policy, of abolishing the Welsh Assembly?
Well, devolution has failed. We've had 20 years of the Welsh Assembly and we've had 20 years of Labour government. The electoral system that produces the members of the Assembly is skewed in favour of left-wing parties. Labour got a third of the votes, but they got half the seats. And with their little helpers in Plaid Cymru and the sole Liberal who survived the last
So you have a coalition of so-called progressive parties?
Yeah, and so if you're centre-right in your politics, you can never have an influence upon the government in Wales. And in 20 years, we've gone backwards as an economy relative to the rest of the UK. 20 years ago, Northern Ireland was the bottom of the heap, and now it's Wales. In income terms, Wales is a poor country. 23% of the households in Wales are in fuel poverty. They spend more than 10% of their income on heating and lighting. And Labour's done nothing for ordinary people because they're the party of mass immigration, they're a party of green policies that whack up your fuel bills, and so much else which is inimical to the interests of ordinary working people.
And of course ordinary working people in Newport West and elsewhere in Wales and indeed in the United Kingdom are paying for all of this. And you very kindly invited me down a few weeks ago to the Welsh Assembly in Cardiff. The first time I'd been, I was totally shocked by the fact that no expense had been spared, and even more shocked when I was leaving when one of your assistants said to me, the carpet's going to be changed, it's going to cost £5,000 because we're not going to be an assembly anymore, we're going to be a parliament. So what have these people been doing if after 20 years Wales is poorer than anywhere else? And I understand in Wales the health service, NHS, is run by the Assembly, and people are coming from Wales to England to have health service treatment.
Yeah, half the health boards in Wales, 7 health boards, more than half of them are in special measures. That's completely controlled from Cardiff by the Minister because the health board has failed to deliver for health services properly in their region, or they're in targeted intervention, which means that big parts of what they do are not fit for purpose, and again are run effectively by the Minister from Cardiff. Our cancer outcomes are worse in Wales than almost anywhere else in Europe. Waiting times for ambulances are through the roof. We have a massive shortage of doctors, GPs, in various parts of Wales. There's some places like Blaenau Ffestiniog, for example, in my region, where all the doctors are locums, effectively. So in the health service managed by Labour, they regard that as their flagship policy. They've totally, utterly failed as a result of devolution.
So devolution hasn't worked, and it's quite interesting because I wonder then, with all this expense and cost in the Welsh Assembly, all these Assembly members and so on, what are the Welsh MPs doing in Westminster? Because, of course, most of their powers, apart from taxation, defence and foreign affairs, I think, have been taken away.
Well, they're just lobby fodder for the London-based parties, aren't they? We've still got 40 MPs in Wales, for exactly the same constituencies as in the Welsh Assembly, but they're not responsible for education, not responsible for health, not responsible for agriculture, not responsible for the environment, not responsible for transport. So what are they doing? They're only there to vote through
getting paid
measures for the rest of England.
Creating costs.
Exactly. They're voting on measures for England where they can't vote on them for Wales.
So the Welsh MPs are voting on English measures, and the Scottish MPs as well, but they can't effect in Wales or Scotland. What a nonsense that is. So basically we've got local district council, we've got county councils, we've got the Welsh Assembly in Wales, Newport City Council here, we've also got a House of Commons, House of Lords and the European Parliament. So I would say it sounds to me a bit like it's over-governed.
Well, the one thing that we're not short of in Wales is politicians. We are short of lots of things because Wales is a very poor country, but we're not short of politicians. What we need to do is get rid of them.
And of course the money saved could then be used to make ordinary people's lives better in Wales. Wales has been run by the Labour and Conservative parties, mostly by the Labour Party for decades, and we only need to look around to see the state of the health service, the state of the streets and all the rest. And the only decent policy that I'm aware of that's been introduced was originally a UKIP one to abolish the Severn Bridge tolls. Now, here in Newport West, if you agree with abolishing the monstrous carbuncle of the Welsh Assembly, it's a licence for wasting money, please, please, please vote for Neil. He's the only candidate here in Newport West, because the Conservative candidate, the Labour candidate, the Liberal Democrat candidate, the Plaid Cymru candidate, all the major parties are in favour of retaining the Assembly. Why? Because it's jobs for the boys, because the only people benefiting are the members, not the people who elect them. So just moving on to your other policies, Neil, we've got, I'd like to talk to you about green taxes and how that increased the cost of food and other goods.
Yeah, well, all the other parties, of course, are massive supporters of green policies, so-called green policies anyway. Save the world, save the planet by trying to change the weather. Well, we all know that the weather varies all the time and has done since the world began. And we had Roman times, it was a warm period, dark ages was a cold period, Middle Ages warm. 300 years ago we went through a little ice age, and now the planet has warmed a bit by 1 degree in the last 150 years. There is nothing that human beings can do to influence what happens in cosmic forces, and so these exercises are like something out of Gulliver's Travels, really. But the result is that ordinary poor people are suffering because your electricity bills are 15 to 20% higher than they need be in order to pay subsidies to developers of wind farms, onshore and offshore, solar panel farms. Farmers don't grow food any longer, they grow forests of windmills and solar panels, and make far more money out of them than they do out of growing food. But who pays? Ordinary people. You know, Wales is a poor country. A quarter of the households in Wales are in fuel poverty, spending more than 10% of their income on keeping warm in the winter and keeping the lights on. Poor people are the ones who are paying the price of these middle-class obsessions.
And of course it is the Greens, of course, do have these obsessions. They don't always adhere to them themselves, of course, because we have champagne Greens in the way that we have champagne socialists say, do what I say, not what I do. But these extra taxes are costing money for people who cannot afford that money. They need the money to survive and feed their families every month, and that's been caused by unnecessary additional red tape coming from the EU.
And one more thing, of course, everybody's electricity bill's got 5% VAT on. When Gordon
from the EU.
Yeah, when Gordon Brown wanted to abolish VAT on domestic fuel, oil and electricity, but he was told by the EU that he couldn't do it. Back in 1997, there had to be a minimum 5%.
But he's the British Prime Minister.
Yeah, and
he was told by the EU.
Yeah, but he was told by the unelected.
That's a shock.
By the unelected commissioners in Brussels that he couldn't manage Britain's VAT policy. Once we put VAT on something, it has to stay. You can reduce it, but only as far as to 5%. So once we're out of the EU, we can cut 5% off everybody's electricity bill, and much else besides, of course, food, footwear. So there are lots of things that you've got VAT on which we can get rid of when we've got freedom to do it.
It's quite interesting because most people do not realise, everyone knows UKIP stands for Brexit, and here in Newport West it's the only party standing for Brexit, the only major party standing for Brexit. But the interesting thing is, quite a few people don't think that the alternative of Remain is to go to the status quo ante, the status quo before.
Well, the EU, of course, has boundless ambition to become a federal superstate. The technocrats in Brussels, who are not elected, are not answerable to the people, so their agenda is very different from ours, because we are answerable to the people. And
they can kick you out if they're not happy
exactly.
with you.
And over the last 50 years, we've changed from a common market to a European Union, and the clue is in the title. What's on the label, it does in the tin. And they want to go further. You know, we've got the euro in most of Europe, and there'll be interminable pressure upon us to join the euro as time goes on, if we bottle it now and wave the white flag at Brussels and say Brexit's all too difficult. Because I've been a member of the Council of Ministers in Brussels, and I know what it's like just to be the one person saying no to things. Actually, I enjoyed it, but there are lots of ministers who just buckled, like Theresa May has buckled.
Tumble down Theresa.
Tumble down Theresa. She is buckled. She was buckled at a puff of wind. But a friend of mine was talking to somebody who was very high up in Downing Street, and he said to her, you know, why did Theresa May agree to the EU's terms on the sequence of the negotiations, agree on the budget and borders, etc.
And sit outside the door
before talking about a free trade agreement?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, it's because they insisted on it. Well, can you imagine Margaret Thatcher doing that? I remember when Margaret Thatcher negotiated our budget rebate, which, you know, we had no cards in our hand apart from the strength of the British Prime Minister. And she said, it's our money, we want it back. And we got it back. But with Theresa May, she gives the whole time.
Well, she's not a negotiator, and I mean, even the Conservatives now recognise that. We've got a truck touring here today which says never trust the Tory, and I think it's very important for Conservative voters and indeed for Labour voters to recall that in the Conservative manifesto in 2017 and in the Labour manifesto there was a commitment to honour the result of the referendum and leave the EU. So that's why we're saying never trust the Tory. It's very, very clear. Leave voters in Newport West, which was a 56% voting Leave constituency, lent their votes to the Conservatives and to Labour in the mistaken belief that the Conservative and Labour parties could be trusted to honour the referendum result as per their manifesto commitment. That hasn't happened, has it?
No, absolutely. And the politicians are betraying the people. This by-election is the people against the politicians. We are the only party with a chance in this election unambiguously campaigning to leave the EU come what may. I've been fighting this battle the whole of my political life since I joined the Anti-Common Market League in 1967. I've been entirely consistent for half a century. I was against going in, and I've campaigned to come out ever since we did go in back in 1973. Even when I was a member of the government under Margaret Thatcher and John Major at the time of the Maastricht Treaty, I was the only member of the government that didn't vote for the Maastricht Treaty. So my record is unblemished in all this, whereas all the other parties, even the Rees-Moggs of the world, have caved in.
The so-called Tory Brexiteers.
Exactly.
Caved in.
So you can't trust a Tory, absolutely right.
And the last question, Neil, you're fighting on a platform of abolishing the BBC licence fee. Would you like to tell us about that?
Well, who wants to pay for the biased broadcasting corporation? You know, £2 billion of our money is forcibly taken from us as a nation to fund this collection of Remainiacs and lefties and others who really are using it as a kind of political vehicle to ram down our throats propaganda of the left. So I think the BBC should sink or swim on its popularity with the people, like everybody else.
Like commercial organisation.
Pay for what you get, and I wouldn't pay a penny for most of what the BBC output is. Why should we be putting £1.75 million a year of our money into Gary Lineker's pocket, for example? Another massive Romaniac, but instead of kicking balls, he's talking balls all the time, certainly on Brexit. So
it's like having to pay for the Guardian, isn't it,
exactly,
through the public purse?
Exactly. So, you know, this is an institution which has long outlived its original purpose, and it's time to pare it down and get rid of the TV licence.
Thank you. So, if you want to send a message from Wales all the way to Westminster, vote Neil for Newport on Thursday, the 4th of April. Thursday, the 4th of April. Neil is the only major candidate in Newport who is for abolishing the Welsh Assembly, who's voting to make Brexit happen. Send a message. Your vote counts in Newport West. Vote Neil. Excellent candidate. Thank you very much indeed, Neil. Thank you.
If you want to support a return to proper parliamentary democracy and for Britain to unite to make a success of Brexit, join UKIP today. Go to www.ukip.org or phone us on 0333 800 6800.